Welcome back, my sleepy nights. And tonight, we delve into the mist-shrouded mysteries of Scottish lore. Join me as we uncover ancient secrets and forgotten tales where myth and magic kindle by firelight. Please like and subscribe for more enchanting journeys into the heart of myths and legends. But now, let's meet legendary creatures where night enfolds ancient Scotland once more. Beyond the mist-cloaked hills of Scotland, where the mournful cry of the wind mingles with the restless roar of the sea, the land undulates and plunges, and the whispering trees harbour centuries of secrets. In a remote glen, a fire of peat moss crackles, and around its flickering light, ancient tales are woven like threads on a loom. When dusk falls like a dark veil over the hills and glens, the mystical realm stirs. The wee folk dart between the trees, just out of sight. In yonder loch, the water monster stirs, biding its time until the village forgets the old ways and their protective charms. Under that grassy knoll, the fairy folk hold court, unseen by human eyes. As night embraces the land, myth and legend come alive. So was born the rich tapestry of Scottish folklore, myths and legends over centuries, conjured by bard, villager, and wanderer alike. The storyteller draws tales from his own fancy or the shared lore of ages past, embellishing as he goes. Some tales explain the mysteries of nature, others impress a moral lesson, and the oldest speak of heroic deeds or explain the origins of ancient customs. Though not as ornate as the myths of Greece and Rome, Scottish legends have an earthly vitality passed down by oral tradition. To call them mythology risks confusion with the classical sense. Tales of gods and heroes from a legendary golden age. The myths of Scotland have a more humble character, blending history with literature, supernatural with natural in a fluid, ever-changing narrative. While lacking a central canon, they share a profound ability to entrance, explain, and illuminate. More than mere fiction, the folk beliefs of Scotland had a religious intensity that shaped everyday life as much as any dogma. Its pagan supernaturalism forms the core of Scottish mythology, less expansive than Mediterranean legends but no less potent. Once an oral tradition vulnerable to constant mutation, only recently was it captured in permanent form. Scottish mythology resists tidy definition, an intricate fusion of history and hearsay, giants and fairies, parables and primordial origins. The real and the unreal mingle freely, joined by a sense of wonder running through every tale. Just as the dramatic scenery of Scotland fires the imagination, so do its legends teem with mystery and enchantment. According to Scottish lore, the Scots traced their ancestry to Scythia. The legend holds that an exiled noble married an Egyptian princess named Scotta. When the Pharaoh's army drowned pursuing the Israelites, Egypt was left exposed. So Scotta's husband led their followers on an epic 42-year odyssey to Spain to escape the Scythian invaders. From there, the Scots migrated to Ireland and finally across the sea to the land that took their name. Arriving in Argyll, they crowned their own kings and remained independent for centuries in the misty, rugged realm that became their new home. So, the fierce vitality of the Scots was born, their myths and legends nourished by the inhospitable yet hauntingly beautiful landscape they inhabited. A primordial magic seems baked into the very bedrock, shrouding the mountains, lochs and glens in mystery. Here, myth and history flow together like two streams merging, stories evolving with each telling around the campfire's glow. So come closer and let's share some myths. When dusk saturated the land and a hush fell, broken only by sounds no mortal ears could discern, the veil lifted between realms. The wee folk slipped between the shadows to wander the human domain. For anything strange or frightening had an uncanny cause. The mischief of fairies and their ilk, who could not be contained in their own sphere. Under the cover of darkness, the fair folk were blamed for much illness and heartache among the villagers. By the same magic, they could transform a man into a hero, or put colour in the cheeks of a sickly bairn. Though dangerous, the fairies provided structure when life and nature were shrouded in mystery and terror. A wailing infant, a tap at the window, lights glimmering over the forest. All might be messages from the other world. As dusk deepened, the sea folk too would rise from the depths to haunt the land, as unfamiliar and fierce as the crashing waves. But the ongoing struggle to coexist with these mythical beings gave shape to mortal lives when little made sense. So the folk tales helped explain the inexplicable and primal fears of darkness, infirmity, and forces beyond control. The endless battle to comprehend the fairy realm became a formula for surviving the unknown. When a Scots lass or lad was spirited away to the fairy realm, it was said that a changeling was left in their place. Why would the magical folk swap an earthly babe for one of their own? Some tales tell that they coveted the happy mortal children, wishing to lure them into eternal revelry. The fairy babes were withered, gloomy creatures, and their kinsmen hoped the mortal heir would improve their sickly temperament. But many feared the fairy folk had sinister motives. A mother might be nursing a healthy child one night and find it a wizened impostor the next morn. The cunning fairies disguised their plots by blaming humans for the switch. They claimed mortal neglect or ill treatment drove them to steal away the human child into their twilight kingdom. In truth, fairy changelings were frail beings, peevish and prone to weeping. They demanded constant food and care but never thrived, often mysteriously vanishing back into the mists. Some say the fairy queen sent her deformed or dim-witted babes into the mortal realm, slipping them secretly into human cribs to ease the burden on her own kingdom. Others whisper that the fair folk cannot reproduce on their own, but must pilfer human stock to propagate their kind. More ominous tales tell of fairy changelings feeding on the life force of those around them, sucking away the vitality of mother, father, or sibling. Unchecked, such parasitic creatures could leave a Sunday's child little more than a hollow shell. Some even hinted the stolen babes became unwitting slaves in the fairy kingdom, forced to toil at the goblin forge or mine precious metals deep underground. Whatever dark purpose compelled them, the fairies went to great length to conceal the unearthly switch. To reveal a changeling's true nature meant breaking its sinister glamour. Only then could the human babe be recovered from the misty fairy realm. So the superstitious checked for telltale signs: a voracious appetite, failure to grow, unearthly features, and an elder wise woman knew charms and tricks to expose the malevolent changeling in their midst. Even as modern reasoning dismissed these chilling tales, a lingering fear remained of lurking forces plotting to snatch children from warm, safe beds into the night's shadowy clutches. For mystifying as it seemed, the legend of the fairy changelings would not be banished from Scottish hearths, nor the unspoken dread that some evil had crept into the cradle to take a beloved child's place. There was once a blacksmith by the name of Alistair MacEachern, and he lived in a cottage on the Isle of Islay with his son Neil. They lived alone, for the blacksmith's poor wife had breathed no more than once or twice when Neil was born to them. But Alistair MacEachern, or Alistair of the Strong Arm as he came to be known, found great comfort in his son, and they lived contentedly, with familiar habits and routines that brought them much happiness. Neil was a slim youth, with unruly hair and eyes that shone with dreams. He was quiet but easy, and his slight pale frame gave him the countenance of one weaker than he was. When Neil was but a child, the neighbours of Alistair MacEachern had warned the blacksmith of the fairies who lived just over the knoll. The fairies who would find one so slight and dreamy a perfect prize for their land of light. And so it was that each night Alistair MacEachern hung above the door to his cottage a branch of rowan, a charm against the fairies who might come to steal his son away. They lived for years this way, until the day came when Alistair MacEachern had to travel some distance, sleeping the night away from his cottage and his son. Before he left, he warned his son about the rowan branch, and Neil agreed to put it in its place above the door that night. Neil loved the green grass of the hills, and to breathe in the crisp, sunlit air of the banks of the streams that trickled through their land. But he loved more his life with his father and his work on the forge. He had no wish for a life of dancing and eternal merriment in the land of light. And so it was that Neil wished his father a fond farewell, swept the cottage, tended to the goats and to the chickens, and made himself a feast of cornbread and oatcakes and goat's cheese and milk, and took himself to the soft green grass of the hills, and walked there by the sunlight banks of the streams until dark fell upon him. And then Neil returned to his cottage next to the forge, and he swept the crumbs from his pockets and tended to the goats and to the chickens, and laid himself in his tiny box bed in the corner of the room by the roaring fire, and fell fast asleep. Not once had the thought of the branch of Rowan crept across his sleepy mind. It was late in the afternoon when Alistair of the Strong Arm returned to his cottage, and he found the fire quite cold, and the floor unswept, and the goats and the chickens untended. His son was there, for he answered his father's call, but there was no movement from his box bed in the corner, and Alistair crossed the room with great concern. "Tam ill, father," said a weak voice, and there laid the body of Neil, yellow and shrunk, hardly denting his mere mattress. But how could, in just one day, Alistair stared with shock at his son, for he smelled old of decay, and his skin was like charred paper, folded and crisp and creased. But it was his son, no doubt, for the shape and the face were the same. And Neil neighed like this for days on end, changing little, but eating steadily, his appetite strange and fathomless. And it was because of this strange illness that Alistair MacEachin paid a visit to a wise man, who came at once to the bedside of Neil, for he was a boy well regarded by his neighbours. The wise man looked only once at Neil, and drew the unhappy blacksmith outside the cottage. He asked many questions, and then he was quiet. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, and his tone quite fearful. The blood of Alistair MacEachin ran cold. "Alistair, this is not your son, Neil," said the man of knowledge. "He has been carried off by the little people, and they have left a changeling in his place. Alas then, what can I do?" The great blacksmith was visibly trembling now, for Neil was as central to his life as the fiery heat of the forge itself. And then the wise man spoke, and he told Alistair MacEachin how to proceed. "You must first be sure that is a changeling lying in the bed of Neil, and you must go back to the cottage and collect as many eggshells as you can, filling them with water and carrying them as if they weighed more than 10 tons of iron and bricks, and then arrange them around the side of the fire where the changeling can see you. His words will give him away. So Alistair MacEachin gathered together the shells of 20 eggs and did as he was bidden. And soon a thin voice called out from the son's bed. In all my 800 years, I have never seen such a sight. And with a hoot and a cackle, the changeling sank back into the bed. Alistair returned to the wise men and confirmed what had taken place. The old man nodded his head. It is indeed a changeling, and he must be disposed of before you can bring back your son. You must follow these steps. Light a large hot fire in the centre of the cottage, where it can be easily seen by the changeling. And then when he asks you, what's the use of that? You must grab him by the shirt front and thrust him deep into the fire. Then he'll fly through the roof of the cottage. Alistair of the Strong Arm did as requested, certain now that the wizened strange creature was not his son. And as the fire began to roar, the voice called out reedy and slim, "What's the use of that?" At which the brave blacksmith seized the body that lay in Neil's bed and placed it firmly in the flames. There was a terrible scream, and the changeling flew straight through the roof. The sour yellow smoke, all that remained of him. And so Alistair MacEachin cleared away the traces of the fire and returned once more to the man of knowledge. For it was time to find his son, and he could delay no longer. The wise man bade him go fetch 3 things: a Bible, a sword, and a crowing cock. He was to follow the stream that trickled through their land to the grassy green knoll where the fairies danced and played eternally. On the night of the next full moon, that hill would open, and it was through this door that Alistair must go and seek his son. It was many days before the moon had waned, and then waxed again. But it stood, a gleaming beacon in the sky at last, and Alistair MacEachin collected together his sword, and his Bible, and his crowing cock, and set out for the green knoll where the fairies danced. And as the moon rose high in the sky and lit the shadowy land, a door burst open in the hill, spilling out laughter and song, and a bright light that blazoned like the fire in the hearth of the blacksmith's cottage. And it was into that light and sound that the courageous Alistair MacEachin stepped, firmly thrusting his sword into the frame of the door to stop it closing. For no fairy can touch the sword of a mortal man. There, at a steaming forge, stood his son, as small and as wild-looking as the little folk themselves. He worked silently, absorbed in his labours, and started only when he heard the voice of his father. "Release my son from this enchantment," shouted Alistair MacEachin, holding the Bible high in the air. For fairies have no power over mortals who hold the good Lord's book. And they stood back now, cross and foiled. "Return him to me, to his own land," bawled the blacksmith. But the fairies began to smirk, and they slowly crept around him in a circle, taunting him, poking at him with blades of honed green grass. They began to dance, a slow and wiry gyration, moving to a weird song that tugged at the mind of the blacksmith, that threatened to overcome him. He struggled to stay upright, and as he stabbed his arms out in front of him, he dropped his cock, who woke with a howl and gave one mighty crow that sent the little fairies shrieking from the doorway to the other side, sent them howling away from the cock and the blacksmith and his son, who they pushed now towards him, sending them all slipping towards the threshold of their world. For daylight was the curfew of the fairies, and it was true fear that the crow of the red-combed cock was heard. For little people may never see the light of day, perchance they turn at once to stone. They struggled now, prodding the mortals from their world, and begging in an awkward chant for Alistair MacEachin to release his dirk from their door. And as he drew it from the threshold, and stood once more in the land of mortals with his son, a small and crafty fairy thrust his face from the hillside and called out a curse that fell upon the son of the hapless blacksmith like the mist of a foggy night. May your son not speak until the day he breaks the curse. The head popped back, and the fairy was gone. never to be seen again. And so it was that Alistair McEachin and his son went to live again in their familiar cosy cottage next to the forge, and took up their work, their habits and their routines in place once more. Neil's tongue was frozen by the curse of the fairies, but his manner was unchanged, and his father and son lived contentedly. For speech is not always necessary to those who live simply, with things and people to which they have grown accustomed. One day, a year and a week from the fairies' fateful full moon, Alistair set his son the task of forging the new claymore for the chief of his clan. As his silent son held the metal to the fire, he started and looked up for one instant, as wild as he had in the land of the light. For suddenly Neil had remembered, and in that flash of memory, he recalled the intricate forging of the fairies' swords. How he'd learned to temper the blades of their glowing weapons with words of wisdom and charms, with magic and spells as well as with fire. Now he leapt into action and worked with a ferocity and speed that set his father, Alistair of the Strong Arm, reeling with shock and fear. And then the motion stopped, and holding up a sword that gleamed like the light of the full moon, he said quietly, "There is a sword that will never fail the man who grasps it by the hilt." From that time onwards, Neil spoke again, for unwittingly he had removed the curse of the fairies by fashioning a fairy sword to sever a fairy spell. Never again did he remember his days in the fairy kingdom. Never again could he forge a fairy sword. But the chief of his clan never lost a battle from that day, and the sword remained the greatest of his possessions. Neil and his father, Alistair McEachin, returned to their cottage, the finest blacksmiths in all the land, their forge casting a glow that could be seen from hills all around, almost as far as the land of light, where the fairies kick up their heels in fury at the thought of that blacksmith and his clever son. Off the rugged northern shores of Scotland lies the treacherous strait known as the Minch. where unpredictable storms can arise without warning. For centuries, fishermen crossing these perilous waters told tales of the mystical creatures known as the Blue Men of Minch. But who were these strange sea spirits, and why did they haunt the sailors of the Minch? According to legend, the Blue Men were the last survivors of a tribe who once dwelled on the shores of the Minch in ages past. They were said to be descendants of fallen angels, cast out from heaven after the great battle between Lucifer and God. When the defeated angels plunged into the sea, their celestial bodies turned from radiant white to a deep, deep blue. It was said their clan lived peacefully for generations, subsisting on fish and seabirds. But after many years, violence and corruption infected their once pure community. Seeing the degradation of his people, their chieftain appealed to an ancient sea goddess to redeem them. Enraged at their sins, the goddess conjured up a catastrophic storm to punish the wayward tribe. Massive waves crashed over the land, flooding it for leagues and drowning all in their holes of stone. Only a handful survived. Now transformed into spiritual creatures and condemned to patrol the Minch for eternity. The last of these remnants became the Blue Men of Minch. Their skin, hair and eyes stained the same deep indigo of the stormy sea. Those sparing sailors who showed respect for their waters, they would summon vengeful tempests to destroy any who defied them. Sailors who survived deadly Minch squalls swore the Blue Men had judged them unworthy and sought to consign them to the depths. As guardians of the strait, the Blue Men would appear during violent storms or if trouble brewed beneath the waves. Often, they approached vessels disguised as sailors, offering to bring luck for a passage. But it is said their true motive was assessing if the crew treated the sea with humility or disregard. By tradition, the Blue Men challenged sailors they deemed insolent or reckless with riddles. then conjured a lethal storm if the answers displeased them. Any who could outwit the Blue Men proved themselves honourable seafarers and won safe passage. So, the spectral guardians lingered, bound to their timeless duty, judging sailors and serving grim justice to any who disrespected their domain. In the mist-veiled glens and villages of Scotland, forces unseen have long conspired to alter the fates of men. The crone gathering herbs may wield uncanny powers beyond mortal ken. When misfortune strikes, when sickness or strife befall a family, some hidden hand must be blamed. Thus was born the witch lore of Scotland, nourished and emboldened under King James's reign, when dread of those who commune with spirits ran rampant, while pious men deny all magic save God's. An older, pagan fear of the preternatural yet lingers. For witches can, it is whispered, cast enchantments to bless or curse, soothe or kill, bind wills to their command. Small wonder they are both feared and sought after in secret. Charms to repel strange knots in the wood, or keep black cats from crossing one's path, or protect fishermen on restless seas. Who can say these may not guard against darker forces plotting mischief? Let home and hearth be well guarded, for somewhere in the shadowed glen an eerie cackle echoes, as those claimed by the witch fever root out some new threat. The cunning woman they condemn may not know perfumes to restore health or bestow fortune, yet they see only an instrument of evil. But in the end, all are subject to forces beyond control, be they earthly or otherwise. For now, the weary take comfort in simple rituals to ward off turmoil, wrought by hands or powers unseen. While the villagers sleep, something stirs in the gloom beyond the fire's light. A curse? A blessing? Or merely the wind? Such mysteries kindle both imagination and dread. In the land of heather and mist, there was once a family on an island in Uist. They were farm people, and worked hard all year. But when the harvest was over, and the grain tucked safely away for the frosty months ahead, they took it upon themselves to plan a little trip to Lewis, to visit some friends there. It was the same every year. They crossed the sea and got to Lewis, where they had a grand time of it. And then they went home again to cozy themselves away for the long frosty months. And so it was this time that they gathered an able crew and set off. At Lewis, things seemed much the same as they ever had. The man of the family went to greet the woman of the house they were visiting, and they talked for many hours of days of old and of good friends and family. And just as he made preparations to get off to bed, a tall woman entered the room with hair as black as a raven's back. Her eyes were cool and dark, and she whispered something to the woman of the house, and then she left, stopping only to stroke the woman's hair. "Who's that ugly black thing?" asked the man, curious about how familiar the two women were. And the woman sighed, and she replied, "Is that what you say? Ugly, is she? Woe betide you, man, but you'll be lost in love with her before you leave Lewis. If you can, of course." And with that, she rose and went off to bed. Now the man scowled with the thought of it, for he had 3 great strong bairns and a lovely wife, as fair and pink and white as this thing was black. Indeed, he muttered to himself, "I won't fall in love with her." He spat a bit of old tobacco into the iron sink and prepared to retire himself. And so he rose in the morning, and the first thing that ate at his mind was the thought of that tall girl, with hair as black as a raven's back. And then he went downstairs, stormy as the North Sea waters. That night the girl came again to the house, though she'd not been out of his mind since her last visit, and he hated her even more. All tall and black, with those cool dark eyes. But when she left, he longed for her like he'd longed for no other, and he grew black himself with rage and desire. Now this went on every day for a week, with the man growing silent and cold. So his wife felt afraid and begged him to take leave of that house. "We've had a good visit now, and it's time for us to be making our way home," she said firmly to her husband. And with the last tiny shred of rational thought left in his mind, which longed for the tall girl with hair as black as a raven's back, he agreed. And so it was that their belongings were packed, and the big strong boat made good, and they arrived at the sea to leave. But as the first foot was set inside that big boat, a great black gale was brewed and flung at them, and they could go no further. There was nothing for it but to return to the house from which they'd come, and to that tall woman. And so again the next morning they set out, but the mists drew around them, cool and dark, and they could go no further. There was nothing for it but to return to the house from which they'd come, and to the cool dark eyes of that woman. But as they walked away from the coast, they met a wee old witch with hair that was whiter than the down of a thistle, and a small wrinkled face that spoke of great wisdom. And she stopped them there and beckoned them aside. "Well, my good folks," she said, "you've a bit of trouble leaving this dark place." They nodded and listened intently. "Well, it's no wonder," said the wee old witch, "seeing the kind of place you've been staying. What will you give me for fine weather to go tomorrow?" "Anything. Anything we'll give to you," said the wife earnestly, and looked to her husband. But his eyes were trained on the hill, on the house with the tall woman with the cool dark eyes, and his face was rent by a longing such as she'd never seen before. "We'll do anything," she said again firmly. "A pound of snuff," said the old witch, "and I'll need to have word with the skipper. Send him by this evening." And with that she showed them to the door. So later that night, the skipper of the big strong boat was sent to see the old witch, and there she handed him a rope with 3 big knots. Here you are, she said. You take this aboard, and you'll have a good day for sailing tomorrow. It'll not be long before you're at Lewis Harbour. Now, if you haven't enough wind, just open one of these knots. And then, if that is not enough still, untie the second. But whatever you do, by God, whatever you do not untie the third knot. And so it happened that on that next morning, the day dawned clear and bright, with a fresh puff of wind to set them on their course. They loaded the boat, and without a backward glance, they headed to sea. And the man of the family let out a sigh of relief, so long and so frenzied that the others averted their eyes. His thoughts were once again pure, and the magic of that old witch had set him free. He called to the skipper. "Untie a knot," he said gruffly. "Let's get us home at once." And so, a knot was untied on the rope, and a swift breeze blew up that sent them cutting through the waves. "And again," he cried. The wind cold on his body, his soul cleansed and clear. And another knot was untied, so that a great wind was let loose on the tiny ship. And they flew across the water now, the sails stretched to the limit. And the man of the family settled himself on deck, and with the sea air licking his face, he felt safe from all danger, and perhaps a little too confident. For he called out then, "Let's test that old woman's magic. What means that third knot?" And his crew cowered away from him, and his wife shook her head. But he insisted, and being the man of the family, and in charge of his boat, and his own fate, he had his way, and the knot was untied. What happened then is a story for the ears of the fearless only. For from the sea rose a sight that clamped shut the mouths of the men, and the wife, and their children, until their dying day. It was a shape, tall, very tall, with a face of sorts, from which shone cold, dark eyes. And a hand reached down, and the man of the family plucked from amongst them and cast into the sea. And then the boat itself was lifted high above the waves and placed on their home island, from where she'd never move again. She's still there to this day, a warning to all who think that magic can be tested. And the land there has come to be called Port Ilin Nakula, or Port of the Island of the Boat. Deep in the heart of Scotland, the district of Badenoch stretches from Loch Laggan to Cairngorm. Not far from the source of Spey, the farm of Laggan is central in Badenoch, sitting in the shade of Mark na Craig. It is a peaceful place now, except for the traffic of the A86 and the chatter of visitors from the centres of Aviemore and Newton Mourne. But it was not always so. A long time ago, Laggan was the home of a lady known as Bain na Laggan, wife of Laggan, who had the reputation of being a witch. Nowadays, it is possible to laugh at such an estimation, but in the past, a witch was an object of genuine fear. Superstition was rife, based on a mixture of ignorance and ancient beliefs, warped by half-remembered knowledge. Amongst this lived a people naturally imaginative, laced with individuals blessed with powers denied to most. In a land where lochs could host water horses, seas concealed mermaids, and standing stones evoked powerful images from the past. Was witchcraft so unimaginable? The wife of Laggan lived in a state of continuous feud with her neighbours in the next town. And when the nearest crofter found the wife's sheep loose among his fields, he was not surprised. Angrily, he penned them, refusing to give them back to the wife until she paid for the damage they had caused. This backfired, for the wife began a campaign of attrition against the crofter. A series of misfortunes drove the man out of Badenoch, and as he left he muttered about the great black cat which had plagued him. For For a while the croft remained empty, but others in the township suffered the wrath of the wife. With animals sickening, crops failing, and minor accidents becoming too commonplace to be coincidence. At length, the township fought fire with fire, as one Donald Bain took over the vacant croft. Donald was a bit of a witch himself, of the white variety, and he knew what measures could counter the wife's attacks. Bog fur tied to the tail, or horn of a cow protected the animal from sorcery, while an iron horseshoe or a rowan branch tied to the shape of a cross could be placed above a door or window to deny access to anything evil. With the building secure and animals safe, the folk of the town could breathe easier. But there was still a black cat creeping around. Hens and eggs were still vanishing. It was not practical in those free-ranging days to keep all the fowl indoors. Donald, however, had the answer. Melting a spoon for silver, Donald moulded a bullet and went hunting for the cat. A sighting, a quick shot followed by a very human scream. And when next seen, the wife of Laggan was limping. She also knew how dangerous her opponent was. Autumn came early to Badenoch, bringing rain from the west. Working at the summer shieling, Donald was at his fireside, drying his clothes, when a black hen fluttered to his feet. This was no part of his, so Donald blessed himself. Gradually the hen grew larger, altering shape, until it became the wife of Laggan, crouching by Donald's fire. On the opposite side of the flames, Donald's dogs growled and snarled, hackles rising. But they were too well trained to attack, unless ordered. Not knowing this, the wife was nervous and asked Donald to tie them. "I'm sorry," Donald replied, shaking his head, "but I've no rope." The wife pulled out some of her long hair and suggested he use that instead. Wary of the wife, Donald appeared to tie back his dogs, but instead fastened the hair round his coat sleeve. Sure of the success of her plan, the wife attacked him, screaming, "Tightened hair, cut and strangle. Instead of choking the dogs, the hair tightened round Donald's coat. When the dogs saw their master in danger, they leaped on the wife, throwing her to the polished earth floor. She screamed, struggled, and ran, with both dogs snapping at her. Donald remained in the shieling all night, only leaving when dawn arrived. There was a dead dog on the track, choked by a piece of bloody flesh in its mouth. Other men of the township joined Donald and told him that the wife was dying. Donald's dogs had gnawed and bitten her so badly that she would not survive long. One by one, the crofters joined Donald as he walked to Laggan. But they remained at the door as he entered the witch's farm. They took the body of the witch to the top of the knoll, and there they burned it. That knoll, Witch Hill, was marked by nature for now until this day. No trees grow above the ashes of the wife of Laggan. In the rugged realm of lochs and moors, Scotland's mist-shrouded landscape hides creatures conjured from imagination and nightmare. When dusk settles across the heathered hills and the wind sighs through ancient glens, eerie sounds emerge that chill the blood of shepherd and farmer alike. In the depths of murky lochs, untouched by light, legend tells of serpentine beasts swimming silently through the gloom, monstrous in size, with writhing coils and carnivorous maws. On the lonely moorland roads after dark, travellers whisper of a horrific apparition that haunts the midnight heath, hungry for those lost and wandering. Not all mythical creatures stalking Scotland's wild places crave violence and terror. In the shadowed forests, some say an alluring spirit appears, offering inspiration and visions to poets and artists, before ultimately claiming their lives. And on remote mist-shrouded isles, haunting music and voices are carried on the wind, signals that mysterious folk of the sea have come ashore and roam the cliffs, So, the land that spawned tales of banshees, kelpies, and other fantastic creatures remains home to legends of beings perhaps supernatural, perhaps imagined. Though modern reason rejects these old stories, a prickle of primal dread remains when mist descends on the lochs, and the wind through the ancient trees sounds like an unearthly cry. For who can say what strange creatures inhabit the wild reaches and black waters of Scotland, only revealing themselves under the cover of darkness. Returning to Iona from his mission to Christianize the Picts, Saint Columba approached one of the crossing points of the river Ness. There was a small settlement here, and a group of people were digging a grave for a newly dead man. When Columba asked how the man had died, he was told he had been killed by a monster who lived in the loch. This interested the saint, but did not seem to worry him, for he let one of his monks swim across the Ness to fetch a boat, which bobbed against the opposite bank. Celtic monks were a hardy breed, and the monk who swam across cheerfully leaped into the water and began to swim to the boat. He was about halfway across when the monster reappeared. Columba, however, was equal to any monster. The blessed man raised his holy hand, Columba's biographer wrote, while all the rest were stupefied with terror, and commanded the monster, saying, "Thou shalt go no further, nor touch the man. Go back with all speed." As extra insurance, the saint made the sign of the cross, and that was enough for the monster. It fled. It is nearly 90 years since the spate of recent sightings began, or at least since the monster became popular in the public imagination. Perhaps the advent of tourism had something to do with it. The relative ease of travel in the Highlands, or the increased use of media coverage, so that what was once purely local importance has become widely known. If there seems a lot of fuss generated about the possible existence of an unidentified animal in an otherwise obscure Scottish loch, maybe it is an expression of modern escapism. Perhaps it is better to concentrate on something interesting, unimportant, and romantic than on the relentless realities of the world. It was in spring 1933 that a local couple saw something like a whale on the waters of Loch Ness. The Inverness Courier reported a strange spectacle on Loch Ness, and from there on, Nessie never looked back. That same year, the term Loch Ness Monster was used, and so the legend was born, or reborn, as the case may be. Every year now, people gather at the lochside, hoping for a glimpse of the supposed monster. Some are lucky, most are not. At 24 miles long and about 1 mile wide, Loch Ness has not a huge area of surface water in which to hide a monster, less so a family of monsters. However, the loch is deep, about 700 feet on average, and far deeper in places. In fact, the loch is so deep, it has never been known to freeze. At its widest and deepest point, where the ruined medieval castle presides over the dark water, Nessie most often surfaces. Here, the mountains subside, and the glen gouges deep into the land, a natural lay-by for Nessie. There is a dramatic photograph of something on the loch around here, with the shattered keep of the castle, providing both scale and evidence of place. A tree branch, perhaps, or the wake of a boat, perhaps, and perhaps not. Not only simple cameras have been used to record the presence of something unusual in the loch. Many types of electronic gadgetry have been used, including sonar, radar scanning, and many submarines. But all the results seem to have been inconclusive. Vague shapes, formless shadows in the murky waters, the detection of what could be a shoal of fish, or something else. Then, in 1975, came a breakthrough. One of the many research parties from the United States claimed to have photographed a plesiosaur in the loch. Not only one, but an entire family, according to the Sir Peter Scott of the World Wildlife Trust, could live in Loch Ness. This created pandemonium in the intellectual world, and a debate on Nessie was to be held in Edinburgh. This was the high point. The meeting was cancelled. The photograph was never published, and the discussion never reached the House of Commons. Was Nessie being protected? A reply was given when some members of Parliament were allowed to study the evidence. and ultimately Nessie was granted a Latin name. The name apparently means Loch Ness Marvel with a diamond-shaped fin. Anagrammatically, it also reads Monster Hoax by Sir Peter S. Monster Hoax? There have been something like 10,000 sightings since Columbus' time. The beast has been seen on land and water. It has been chased by motorcyclists and has crossed the road in front of motor cars. It has been photographed and traced on sonar. It has been scoffed at by millions. Nessie is a part of the legend of Scotland, and far too interesting to dismiss as a mere hoax. Nations other than Scotland have their monsters. The dragons, the beasts which haunt ragged moorland and dense forests. But few can boast so many, or such a variety. For Scotland is, or was, frequented by Kelpies, water horses, water bulls, mermaids, seal men, and of course, the sinister Blue Men of the Minch. The fact that a great number of these legendary creatures comes from the Highlands could be significant. Is the Norse Gaelic mind more prone to contact with these entities? Or are they merely more imaginative? Was the entire country once rife with monster tales, but only in the less easy to tame landscape of the Highlands have they been preserved? One type of beast which has no good said of it is the Kelpie or water horse. The Kelpie often appeared in the form of a horse, which lured the unwary rider to it. Once mounted, it would gallop off with its rider to the nearest river to certain death by drowning. At one harvest time, by the Conon River, north of Inverness, some men were plying their sickles on the oats when they heard a deep voice. "The hour is come, but not the man." They looked round, and there was a Kelpie in the ford, which lay in the shadow of the church. As the clock struck the fatal hour of noon, a young man appeared, riding towards the ford. 4 of the reapers stopped him, warned him of the Kelpie's words, but he ignored them and spurred on. Or he tried to, for the reapers grabbed him, hauled him from his horse, and carried him into the church. Locking the door, the reapers kept him there for an hour before re-entering the church to set him free. They were too late. As they were waiting outside, the young man drowned in an ancient stone trough within the church itself. Often the water horse disguised itself as a handsome young man and wooed a local lass to her death in the dark waters of a loch. On one occasion in Badenoch, the tables turned as the horse came ashore as a lovely girl and only gave herself away when she laughed with a loud neigh. In this case, her lover had the presence of mind to draw a dirk and stab his companion. As she died, the girl changed back into the slimed creature from the loch. Given her immense seaboard, it is not surprising there was a number of mermaid tales from Scotland. What is surprising is how recent some of them are. As late as 1947, a fisherman from Mock met a mermaid combing her hair, while Sandwood Bay in northwest Sutherland was a well-known haunt for the creatures in the early years of this century. Legend tells of a hoard of jewels deep beneath the sea off Duncansby Head, which was looked after by a beautiful mermaid. It was a lonely life for the mermaid, but the sea god felt sorry for her and allowed her to have as many companions as she could keep. Now, she has scores of once human lovers forever, bound to the seabed with chains of fine gold. Or there was the poignant little tale from Iona, where the mermaid fell in love with a saint. The saint was unable to return her devotion, as the mermaid's soul was not human. In the cool morning and the white Hebridean night, the mermaid swam ashore to pray for a soul. But always the sea called her back. She was a sad mermaid and cried bitterly. Her tears landed on the blessed shore and were miraculously solidified into the pebbles, which are there today. And so, the sun dips below the crags, and the clouds cloak the hills in shadow. The fire yet burns as the last echoes of lore and legend fade into the gathering dusk. The storyteller pauses, gazing into the embers smouldering low. For now, the tales of this age draw to a close, but they will stir again as the wheel of seasons turn and darkness returns to claim the land. Myths and folklore may be lost, distorted, or woven anew with each telling around flickering firesides, though the modern world encroaches with electric light and reason. The ancient realm yet endures beneath the new, slumbering but never wholly forgotten. Over the lonely moors, the wind still whispers of mysteries not yet explained, of things lurking just out of sight, in black loch waters. Some primal force glimpsed but not understood still stirs, awaiting the time when myth becomes truth once more. So, let the ashes grow cold and silence claim the croft. The storyteller takes his leave. But as the night enfolds the hills, while the villagers slumber, the ceaseless work of imagination continues. Fantastic histories wait to be born, fabricated and obscured in turn. For in this land of crag and kyle, where sea meets heathered shore, belief and whimsy reign alongside reason in the perpetual clash of magic and logic. And here, fertile ground eternally exists, for weaving new tales to entrance, new myths to make sense of the inexplicable, fresh stories to kindle in firelit hearths when darkness returns.